It never ends with these people. So I came across this post a little while ago that has a lot of blah, 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 Twitter-related bullshit, completely inconsequential to the topic at hand. The most important and significant takeaway, though, is this sentence here that says, the Reylo fandom was born of the idea of abusive relationships. And I've taken issue with that because it's comments like these that lead me to believe that people like this, that make posts like this, are either just so blatantly disingenuous that they just need to be dishonest and stir the pot and lie to their audiences, or these are people that apparently have only ever seen the sequel trilogy. Like, for whoever made this post, if this video somehow finds you, there's actually other Star Wars content out there that you should probably watch, and if you do watch it and have any kind of objectivity in that head of yours, you'll see that this post makes you look like an ass. Yeah. But before I get into the topic of the real most toxic relationship in Star Wars and get into the nitty-gritty details of that, I wanted to make some things clear about the Reylo shipping that became a thing in the sequel trilogy, and it's that I'm not really a fan of it. Surprising, I know, as a fan of the sequel trilogy, I don't really care for it. It's not a thing that I ever really bought because it just didn't seem like a natural setup. Does that mean I think that these characters weren't set up to have any kind of feelings for one another? No, not really. The movies do their diligence to set them up to have some kind of emotional bond towards one another, and they do have some kind of friendship for one another, except it's the kind of emotional bond and relationship that I could easily buy it turning into a friendship, but not really a romantic relationship, simply due to the fact that they don't spend enough time together with one another. Sure, they are linked through the Force and have these mental projections of one another where they're able to contact one another and interact with one another in short times, and they do have these select moments where they show care and concern and protect one another in times of need at certain points, but those times versus Kylo's time spent fighting for the First Order on the polar opposite moral end of the battlefield against Rey, it just doesn't leave anything believable that these two would come together as a romantic couple. Now, I know there's probably some of you out there that would probably ask, well, if you don't care that much about Rey and Kylo's relationship, why are you trying to defend it? Because it's still dishonest. It's still not true. And when you allow people to go with this fictional narrative long enough, they actually start believing it's true and they don't look at the broader picture of things. Like, you still have people to this day that still run with the narrative of the Force is female as if it's an actual thing, because the people who spread this misinformation don't do their due diligence to correct their misinformation once the truth becomes widely known. And if I'm ever going to get to the point in my channel's history where I can sit down and talk about what I think the actual issues of the sequel trilogy are, I have to go through the never-ending slog of bullshit that people invent before I can even get to that. We have to dispel the padded list of gross exaggerations before we can even get to the point of talking about the real issues and hopefully one day recognize them as problems and then ask for better from the creators in the future. But let's break down Rey and Kylo's relationship and try and see where people get the idea that their relationship is actually toxic. I would say that their real relationship with one another would start in The Last Jedi, given that that's where they are more constantly linked and they do show more compassion and what we could even use the word affection for one another throughout the movie. But we do have to keep into account the previous movie where they were introduced to one another, and Rey's experience of Kylo's at the time was him kidnapping her, forcefully mentally invading her mind, and killing Han Solo, a man that she had grown attached to in the time she got to be with him. Needless to say, her beginning attitude towards him was very negative, and even by the events at the start of the next movie in The Last Jedi, the moment she's linked up with him and she sees him, she immediately tries to shoot him, and she calls him a monster for the things that he's done. But through their constant constant linking together where she can't actually attack him and they're just sort of forced to communicate with one another. She is forced to just have conversations with him. And it's through these conversations where she sort of starts seeing more about Kylo's perspective and why he does what he does, why he fell to the dark side, and she does start showing genuine sympathy and care for him. Fast forward to near the end of the movie where she's at Snoke's mercy and Kylo is ordered to execute her. I would say it's at this point where Kylo kills Snoke and they both fight tooth and nail to defend each other from the Praetorian Guard, or I guess we could say, for the sake of argument, just to make things a little bit simpler, that this could be seen where their romantic relationship starts. Let's just say that for the sake of argument. And that's really where the toxicity to their relationship could be seen to begin, because it's in that moment after they've defeated the Praetorian Guard where Rey's so excited because she thinks she's won Kylo back to the light, and now he can order the First Order to stop firing on the Resistance and they can end this conflict once and for all, where Kylo says, no, we don't have to do that. And he wants to commit himself to staying in charge of the First Order and bring some kind of new order to the galaxy that breaks Rey's heart. And it even goes so much further than that, where he makes Rey cry by making her confess her worst fears in thinking that her parents abandoned her and that they were nobodies and they gave her up for drinking money. They didn't care about her. All of this thing is objectively a completely toxic thing for someone to do to someone that they allegedly care about. But you also have to understand that Kylo is trying to break Rey's will, which isn't to justify his behavior. It's just further proof that he is, at this time, a toxic person to her. But what Rey does is the emotionally mature thing to do. Throughout the rest of the story, from The Last Jedi to The Rise of Skywalker, when Rey is in a position to talk to Kylo and she is trying to offer him a path back to the light, when he's refusing that path, she doesn't stick around, she doesn't play by the stand by your man mentality, she leaves and closes herself off from him. She doesn't stay in that toxic environment, which is the emotionally responsible thing to do for yourself if you're in that kind of relationship. You don't stick around, you don't try and justify their behavior, you just leave. You've given them your offer to try and win them back to light and offer them a path back to a better way of doing things, but if they reject that and they're using their toxicity to emotionally hurt you or try and manipulate you, you remove yourself from that environment. And that's what Rey does. But there are still times where Rey does show that same sympathy and compassion and understanding to Ben, and even tells him that she was 100% willing to take his hand and be with him, but she wanted Ben Solo, not Kylo Ren. She was willing to take his offer if it was from the good man she knew was deep down inside him, not this toxic person he was trying to be. And really, we have to fast forward from there to near the end of the movie, because that's really the last time they actually interact with each other, up until Ben comes to Rey's aid on Exegol and helps fight against Palpatine. And even goes so far as when Rey finally kills Palpatine once and for all, and she dies from the act, Ben gives up his own life to bring Rey back because he cares so much about her. Now, again, I don't personally think that this is enough to satisfy the idea that they would have become a romantic relationship, but given that at that point he had come back to the light, he did give up his life and fought alongside her to the very end to save Rey, it is, at least in my opinion, believable that they would have become friends. And I know it might be getting a little nitty-gritty, but I have heard in the novelization of The Rise of Skywalker, it is explained that Rey kissing Ben wasn't really a romantic one, it was one of friendship, which, I mean, sign me up for that kind of friendship. Anything to get kissed like that by Daisy Ridley, I mean, come on. Yeah, let's do that. And I'm going to come back around to the overall representation of Kylo and Rey's relationship, but we got to talk about what the actual real most toxic relationship is in Star Wars, at least as far as the movies are concerned, and that is the relationship between Anakin and Padme. And I have to make this clear right away. None of what I'm about to say is to dog on the prequel trilogy at all, but it's absolutely undeniable they are a toxic relationship, which is actually far more grounded in abusive behavior than between Kylo and Rey's romantic relationship, which is virtually almost non-existent. But let's get into the reasons. First things first, credit where credit is due. Anakin and Padme's relationship is better set up than Kylo and Rey. And if we wanted to say that Kylo and Rey's relationship is the worst set up in all of Star Wars, I would be hard pressed to disagree, because at least with Anakin and Padme, they do things that a loving couple should do throughout at least most of the trilogy. The way their characters are set up, they are set up to be in love with one another from start to finish. From the moment Anakin meets her in episode 1, they do have some kind of affection for one another, even if at the time it's sort of that childhood kid crush sort of thing, at least for the most part from Anakin's perspective. Following up by episode 2, Anakin and Padme start spending a lot more time with one another. They go on the equivalent of what I would call a date. They spend time having dinner together, they go out and frolic in fields, having fun, enjoying each other's company, sharing sweet nothings to one another, and bearing each other's soul to one another. All of those things, I think, are good elements to establish these characters forming a romantic relationship. And I'm not going to get into the petty things that people have brought up in the past, like Anakin's cringy or dry dialogue, because there's at least in-universe explanations for that. Because Anakin has spent most of his life a part of this rigid religious order that doesn't really give him the opportunity to form any kind of romantic relationship with anyone. So of course he's fucking awkward. Of course he doesn't know how to talk to a girl. Of course the things he says are cringy and dry. Really, all of that stuff, all that pettier stuff that people have used to mock the prequels in the past is just kind of inconsequential, because there's at least an in-universe explanation for why those things are the way they are. Is it kind of creepy and cringy to us watching? Yeah, but there's at least some kind of reasonable understanding to it. But from those events forward, there are also things that happen that show that Anakin is not the only one capable of being toxic. Padme herself also has the ability to be toxic in her own way, because being toxic isn't necessarily about being intentionally malicious. It's just about doing things wrong in a relationship that causes harm and damage to other people, be it mentally or physically or whatever. Because in that same movie where Anakin murders an entire tribe of Tusken Raiders and he confesses that to Padme, and with tears in his eyes screams at her that he slaughtered them like animals, Padme doesn't do anything about this. From that point forward, Padme completely overlooks this red flag and it's never brought up again. And frankly, it kind of should have been, because by the events of the next movie, after Anakin sacked the Jedi Order and Obi-Wan goes to Padme and tells her he's seen the holo footage of Anakin killing younglings, Padme pretends as though this horrendous violence is completely out of Anakin's character, when she knows firsthand he is completely capable of emotional instability and violence. So when she says, Anakin could never do something like that, it just makes her look like she's covering his ass for his past crimes. And look, we can get into the nitty-grittier details about the state of the Tusken Raiders on what they should be perceived as, either sentient people or animals. Personally, typically animals don't have villages, and you don't refer to animals like men, women, and children. And even Anakin proclaims out loud, they're like animals, so I slaughtered them like animals. He doesn't say they are animals, so I slaughtered them like animals. And I mean, I get at the same time, I think there are other outside sources that delve into Padme's perspective where the Tusken Raiders are seen more like wild animals and savages. So in a way, it's not meant to be that big of a deal. But at the same time, if a guy just goes around massacring animals, you don't think that might be a sign he might be a tad bit psychotic? Not to mention, the movie also goes out of the way to show that when he's screaming this at Padme, he's crying because he's ashamed of what he's done. And I mean, at least that's some kind of show that he is regretful in a way for what he did, even though he's trying to make it out like he's justifying it. But at the same time, he still slaughtered what he identified as women and children. Really, the way the conversation should have gone is, I saw Anakin killing younglings. Oh my God. Again? I'm sorry, but you're going to need to swing that by me one more time. Did you say again? Well, like, yeah, he killed an entire tribe of Tusken Raiders, women and children included. He had a lot of emphasis on that one. And you bring this up now? Well, like, yeah, he would have gotten in super amounts of trouble. You fucking think? Well, you know, like, stand by your man no matter what. And, you know, he has kind of a cute butt. He does have a cute butt, but fuck, Padme! Red flag much! And even at a point, Padme tries doing what Rey ultimately does with Kylo. When she realizes that Anakin actually has done the horrible things that he's done, and he is completely not willing to come back to the person that he was, and is more focused on his own power and thinking what he's done has been just a net benefit for everything, for himself and for Padme, she backs away from him. And she tells him she can't follow him down this path, just like Rey does for Kylo. And literally leading up to that moment, with Anakin so deranged by his corruption in the dark side, he's so paranoid at thinking he's being betrayed by Padme, he straight up strangles his pregnant wife. But Kylo and Rey's relationship is the one that is singularly built on abuse. No, not even close. Because by the time Kylo and Rey's relationship reaches the point that we could possibly recognize as the beginning of their romantic relationship, they get to that point through understanding one another and showing compassion and sympathy to each other's problems. And when push comes to shove, Kylo and Rey fight to defend one another. Those things happen before we get to the abusive, toxic part of where their relationship would actually begin. Those things happen that cause them to have these feelings for one another and this care for one another, and then it transitions into the toxic behavior from Kylo's part because of who he is. But again, don't think this is me trying to rag on the prequel trilogy. This relationship was constructed to be toxic by design. Lucas has talked about on multiple occasions the issues with love and the Jedi. And it really has nothing to do with a Jedi loving someone. It just has to do with the complication that most of the time when someone loves another person, they feel a sense of possession over them. They feel a sense of ownership over that other person. If they love that person, they belong to them. And that's exactly how Anakin is set up. Because Anakin and Padme are in love with each other, Anakin feels Padme belongs to him. That's why when he starts having these visions, these forced visions of the future showing Padme's death, he turns to these unnatural means to defy the destiny that foretold Padme's fate of dying. And it was through this journey of looking for unnatural means to save Padme's life that he fell victim to the dark side, that he allowed himself to be corrupted by Palpatine, who promised him the power to save the people he loved. And really, we could go into extended content for this, like in the Clone Wars, where Anakin, at a point where still no one knows about his relationship with Padme, sees another man kissing her, and he full on whoops his ass in front of her without any warning or any hesitation.
Get away from her!
Anakin, no! Both of you, stop this!
You don't have a say in this!
And in fact, Lucas actually goes out of his way to show in the movies the proper way for a Jedi to love someone through Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan absolutely loves Anakin like a brother. But he doesn't let that love get in the way of his responsibilities as a Jedi. And even though he will do what he must, and even if it emotionally destroyed him to do so, his responsibilities as a Jedi are not superseded by his love for Anakin. He loves Anakin, but he has a responsibility, and he fulfills that responsibility despite loving Anakin. And that's because Obi-Wan doesn't feel like he has possession over Anakin just because he cares about him and because he loves him like a brother. And the entire reason I'm even bringing up Obi-Wan for the sake of this conversation is because Rey's very behavior mirrors Obi-Wan's handling of his own personal emotions when dealing with Anakin. Like with Obi-Wan, though Rey cares and has compassion for Kylo, she doesn't let that care for him supersede her responsibilities as either a Jedi or just a good person. And like with Obi-Wan dealing with Anakin when he was refusing to come back and see reason and turn back towards the light and see the harm he had done, when Kylo chooses to not join Rey back in the light side of the Force, and wants to commit himself to the dark side and commit himself to the First Order, Rey doesn't let her compassion supersede her own morality. And that's where Anakin failed. He's not able to accept Padme's fate, and he supersedes his responsibility as a Jedi and focuses on trying to find the power to save Padme. So really what these two relationships boil down to is Kylo is a man who wanted the power, but through meeting a woman that showed him kindness and compassion and understanding, he fell in love with that woman, even though I don't personally think it was that well executed, but regardless. And at the end of everything, he stood by her side, fought to defend her and help her, and gave up his life for her and gave up that power he had once tried destroying everything to get. Meanwhile, with Anakin, his is a story of a man who loved the girl, but ultimately lost her in his blind and desperate and arrogant pursuit of power. And between those two relationships, it is very clear that Anakin's relationship with Padme is the more toxic. And that is by design. Is Anakin's relationship with Padme still better set up to be more a believable relationship than between Kylo and Rey? I would personally say so, but that doesn't mean if you think otherwise, it's invalid. It's just, I personally think that their relationship wasn't properly set up to begin with. And for a relationship that's not properly set up, for it to ultimately end with Kylo giving up his life to save Rey versus someone who destroyed everything and ended up accidentally, maybe even a little indirectly, killing his wife for the sake of power, it's very clear which one is the more toxic relationship. But that's what the actual focus of the conversation is about. What's actually more toxic versus what's better set up. Now, if you're trying to make the argument of what's better set up, there's a conversation that can be had. But if it's about which is the most toxic, Anakin and Padme's is by design intended to be toxic, while Kylo and Rey's isn't. Does that mean Kylo doesn't do toxic things? Yes, he absolutely does. I'm not discounting that, but the overall story of Rey and Kylo's relationship is nowhere near as toxically done as with Anakin and Padme. From the very start, meant to be intentionally toxic. But that's just my opinion, and it's just something to consider. I'd love to know your guys' opinion. Comment below, let me know, and I hope to see you in the next video. See ya!